Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind podcast. We have our very first guest of the off season, and I'm telling you now, it's an absolutely fantastic one. So let's get to it.
I just wanna rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Another week down, OTAs have started. We've got an awesome podcast for everyone this evening. Let's start with our usual guys. There's three of us here. It must be the first time for a while. So it's great to be back with Lewis and Paul. How are you guys? How are you doing, Paul? How was your week?
I'm doing amazing. Unfortunately, I had to work both Saturday and Sunday. So it's a bit crap in this weather, but apart from that, it's been quite a wicked weekend, and I'm super excited about this show and so glad we could get him on to join us.
Yeah, I think we're all excited. How about you, Lewis? How was your week?
Yeah, all good fun. Very excited for the show today. Very, very fun to be recording on a Sunday. Nice little treat to end the weekend.
Yeah, and it's been a nice weekend. Well, been a nice day today anyway. So without further ado, I think we have to announce our guest because people will be desperate to know since we're all super excited. So our very special guest, he is an absolute legend in the fantasy football space, the consistency guru, owner of Big Guy Fantasy Sports and founder of the FF Expo. Bob Lung is joining us this evening. Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. We're super excited
great to be
have you
here.
on.
Wish I was there live. I know I was there last summer for the UK FFC and got to do the live Scott Fishbowl draft with you guys in London. Had a great time, and I'll be back someday, but not this year. Got to get my stuff going this year. Next year, I think my middle daughter is getting married, maybe. So that may not be next year. So we'll get there. It may take a few years, but we'll get there. But thank you again for having me. Always great to chat with you folks.
Yeah, we're super stoked to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, you're really well known for your consistency guide. The 2024 guide is out now. It came out, was it a few weeks ago, Bob?
Yeah, I think around May 5th, 6th, 7th, somewhere in there. It's been a few weeks, but yeah, all good.
It's a fantastic guide and it's one of my favorite reads every off season. But for those listeners that don't know about it, Bob, tell us a little bit more about what it brings, why it's important for people to kind of be aware of, and how it's going to help people win their fantasy leagues.
Yeah, no, thanks. A lot of people, if they've played fantasy for, whether it's a couple years or for a long time, you've had those players or even a full team like that. Your team goes 500, maybe barely over 500, doesn't make the playoffs, and you're like the third or fourth highest scoring team in the league, and you're like, well, what happened? Probably have some inconsistent players on your team, and if you don't know who they are, that's why you need the book, because you can go there and see. Hey, look, under this scoring method, which, the book is all standard PPR, standard quarterbacks, one quarterback leagues, but it helps you identify because not everybody realizes when you look at, oh, hey, look, I should draft Lamar Jackson. He was fourth last year in total points. He's a guy, he was the MVP, right? I should put him on my fantasy team. 63% consistency says, no, he's not. And you've got somebody like Brock Purdy or Jordan Love, who were more consistent, didn't score as many points, but on a week-to-week basis was there for you as a starter. And that's kind of what we're basing this all on, is that if they earn a clutch game, which is then accumulates into your consistency percentage, that means they're scoring over that factor. And that factor in a 4-point passing touchdown, one quarterback league is about 19 to 20 points. If they get over that on a weekly basis, they earn a clutch game. The more times they go over that, the more consistent they are. So with Lamar Jackson only really helping you 63% of the time, if your team was 63% or, 600 or 500 or whatever, and if you had Lamar Jackson, you're probably going, oh, okay. But he was fourth in total points, right? So a lot of people will argue with me on that stuff, but I stay true to it because it does help. It does make a difference because, those 35-point weeks are great. And if you win by 30 points, guess what? It's still a W. If you win by 5 points, it's still a W. So, that's where that difference really comes out to play. So that's what the book's about. You can get it on Amazon. You guys have Amazon UK there. It will come to you there as well. Always cool. I always see a lot of sales to Great Britain, or the GP or GBP. But yeah, it really helps people understand and identify who the inconsistent and consistent players are. So you can also stay away from the inconsistents and don't draft them too high. So that's pretty much what it's about.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because a lot of people, I don't think they kind of pay enough attention, weekly. And then by the end of the season, they just listen to analysts who say, oh, well, X player was 5th in total points scored this season. They're great. But people forget that it's a weekly game. You have to win each week. It doesn't matter what points, the player ends up with at the end of the season. If they only, they might have really high total points, but they missed 5 games with injury. So you didn't have them for those 5 games, or they've scored 50 points and then no points, and then 50 points and then no points, which is useful for some weeks, but not others. So I think it is a really useful thing to kind of add to your arsenal there. I'm really interested, Bob, because I think certainly in redraft, these principles are really, really, really important. Obviously, best ball is now becoming more and more kind of a type of format that people are enjoying to play. How much do you think consistency is important in best ball as well? Like, are these kind of things that we can also use in our best ball leagues? Because I know historically a lot of people have been talking about spike weeks are useful and et cetera, but do you think consistency also has a place in best ball as well?
Well, I think the book has a place because you can separate the consistent players and the inconsistent players. So when I do some of the best ball drafts, what I usually try to do is get as many consistent players in the early rounds that I know can kind of hold my floor at a nice spot, and then take some more chances on the guys who I know are inconsistent, that maybe were 30th in total points, but were 25% consistent because they scored all their points in 4 or 5 games, or just had a few big games. Sometimes there's players that just fills in for somebody who was injured. But, seeing the numbers, you can kind of look at a position, so like I've got my quarterbacks here. So as I mentioned about Lamar Jackson, being quite inconsistent, but you've got some other players who, like Jared Goff. Now he was 7th in total points, but he was 47% consistent. The thing with him, it's home versus away, man. His home percentage is like 86% consistent. His away is like 22%. Wow. Now that works great in best ball, right? Because you're like, okay, if I have let's say I get a Jordan Love, who's nice, steady, he was like 75, 76% consistent, then I know he'll be there most weeks, but those home games for Jared Goff, who busts off 35, 40 points because he throws 3 or 4 touchdowns at home, then that's where he's going to save me. So consistency is nice, but knowing the inconsistency of some of the other players and who had some good games. Also in the guide, you'll see under a player profile, there's a chart that shows how they do home versus away versus against a top 10 defense, bottom 10 defense. And if you find players that have big spikes in those games, again, those can be some good inconsistent players. You'll find players that just destroy everybody when they're playing against a bad defense, as they should, right? But they garbage the other games. So again, those are players maybe you get round 10, 12, 13, whatever, and they can fill in for those games and, get you kind of centered around, some spikes that may pull you through, some bigger totals. Now I know that this year Underdog has I think it's kind of like an eliminator type thing, where it's best ball, but if you're the lowest, you get eliminated. Well, this is where consistency is really important, because you want to get all those consistent players so you don't ever drop too low in a given week until you get near the end when you've, so I'm really excited about that. I saw that format and I'm like, oh, they did this just for me, man. This is awesome. I'm going to just like go draft like crazy in those leagues now.
You should definitely win that one, Bob.
I hope. It'd be nice. I don't know what they give away. Probably only give away like $50, The other was like $1.5 million. They're like, oh, consistency sucks. They'll give them like $50. No, I'm just
I definitely think there's also things you can pull out for DFS as well, right?
Yes.
So, Jared Goff, only pick him in a home game. I wouldn't potentially put him in my lineup for an away game. So even though obviously things can change on a weekly basis, these kind of general principles that you have in your book are all things that you can draw out for all formats of the game.
Right.
And like you say, I often think that consistency, this is my personal opinion, is more important, like you say, in the higher rounds where you're putting so much draft capital into them. Really, you want them to be hitting your lineup in best ball every week, and you also want them to be putting up good points in your your managed leagues every week because you've spent so much on them. So inconsistency at a high price, I think, is not great when you could have had someone who was consistent at a high price.
I always kind of in the book will tell people, and kind of draft strategy is if they're not at least over 80% consistent, either last year or at some point, if they haven't proven they can be in that 80, 90, even close to 100, they really shouldn't be drafted in the first round. I mean, unless there's just some like, okay, this guy got traded, now he's going to get all the carries. But if they haven't proved consistency in the past, it's hard pressed to believe that they're going to do it in the future. But if they have, and maybe they had a down year, they had some injuries, okay. But, like a Christian McCaffrey, right? He was out for a couple of years due to injury, but we knew when he came back, when he's healthy, you can't beat him from a consistency standpoint. He's always going to put up good numbers week after week, which he did last year. And he was 100%, missed one game, but he was still 100%. And that's why he's going around 1, 2, or 3 in most drafts. And he should. Is there a chance he could get hurt again? Yeah, I am, but there's a chance everybody can get hurt. So, yeah.
I'm quite interested to know, do you tend to get players that change drastically year on year? Do you ever get players that are incredibly consistent one year and completely drop off, or vice versa, players that are incredibly inconsistent and then jump up? And does it tend to be like a situational change, or obviously an injury that will do that? Or do you
I think you have to look at the situation. A player who, let's say 75, 80% consistent one year and then falls off and goes back down to 50. The question is why, right? Did he get hurt? Was there, they lost 3 offensive linemen and as a running back, his line just went to garbage. So he really didn't have much room to run. Look at Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow goes down. Jamar Chase now loses consistency. So it's all the question of why. And if that why now is, okay, that's fixed, Joe Burrow's healthy, then yes, we have to believe that Jamar Chase will be back up in that, 80, 90% range that he was just a couple of years ago. So, but you're right. People do. It's really weird, but people will look at that like, oh, okay. Now Jamar Chase, maybe not, but a player who is a marginal player, maybe they were a solid RB2, and then they got hurt, missed a few games, aren't up there in points. You'll see that their value going into the next year, their ADP, just all of a sudden you're like, what? Why? Well, because it's what have you done for me lately? It's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And so, those are the kinds of values that you want to jump on. I mean, we're seeing that with guys like Josh Jacob, Joe Mixon, Kamara, Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, James Conner. All those guys are all solid running backs and have actually have had pretty decent consistency. I mean, last year, Joe Mixon, if I remember right, he was 76%. But his ADP right now is like running back 21. You're like, really?
To steal.
I mean, still going to be the main guy. Now he's in Houston, right? So you're like, okay, well, I'll take him. So if you want to focus on that RB, the zero RB kind of strategy, right? Just load up 3 wide receivers, and you can pick from that group of players to be your RB 1-2s in rounds 4 or 5. I'm perfectly fine with that, especially if I've got, Jefferson or Jamar Chase or, Tyreek or CeeDee Lamb, all those guys. That certainly can make your team be a lot more solid from top to bottom in those first 5 than going the other way and you get McCaffrey, which is great, but then you're kind of like, okay, well, who can I get in the second round? And then your wide receivers are all gone. So then it makes it even tougher. So I was kind of, at least last year, I did a lot of the three wide receivers if there were good wide receivers available, and then do the 2 running backs. And I definitely did better in those leagues than I tried the other way. So
that's definitely interesting, and it leads on really nicely to my next question, which is I'd be really interested to know about how you kind of vary at different positions when looking at consistency. So you've touched upon there about kind of taking running back a little bit later and going for the elite wide receiver earlier on, but are there positions where you're sort of much more interested in using the metrics to look for upside, or others where you're just mostly looking for that kind of safe floor, looking for a guy who has a high consistency metric or who might be available a little later? I'm also interested to know kind of how tight end plays into this as well, because tight end is such a unique position right now in terms of being generally lower scoring, especially with Travis Kelce's drop off last year.
Yeah, right. So wide receivers are definitely, as a whole, more consistent. Running backs are second, quarterbacks, and then tight ends. Quarterbacks and tight ends are getting closer to each other, which is not good. It used to be like tight ends were like, other than Kelsey, why do we care, right? Yeah. Now they're getting some new ones in. We got Laporta. We've got, I went brain dead, the guy from Arizona, Trey McBride. There's TJ Hawkinson, even though he's hurt. We, of course, got Kelsey, Mark Andrews, if he's healthy. So they're, Evan Ingram, so we've got 7 or 8 now that you can. And the nice thing is that people still have zero love for them. If you look at their ADPs, in fact, I think I was looking at this when I was doing the book, and it was kind of shocking to me. But, you've got Kyle Pitts at 67, Evan Ingram's at 82. I mean, that's round 7. Kittle's 81, Dalton Kincaid 71, Njoku, who is 70% consistent, is at 99, and Jake Ferguson, who is also 65% consistent, was 91. So waiting for a tight end to round 7 or 8, and you're getting some decent consistency out of them, I'm all for waiting. It would be great to get Laporta, but Laporta's ADP is 21. He's going in the second round. And I'm like, yeah, he was good, but come on, man. What are you giving up there? He was first in total points, but it was only 15 higher than Kelsey, who missed 2 games, only 3 points higher than Evan Ingram. And there's a 60 spot difference between the two. I could take Evan Ingram in round 7, and he's only 3 points less than Laporta. But see, people were not looking at that. They're like, Sam Laporta, he's a guy, we got to get him. And I'm like, okay, but round 2, I can't do that. But yeah, going back to your question, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I kind of, again, it's where you draft, right? If you're the end of the first round or beginning of the first round, what do you got to choose from? I still kind of look at the consistency. And if there's a running back that's 90% consistent and the best wide receiver is 85, well, I might take the 90% consistent running back, because points wise, it's fairly similar, especially if it's PPR. But as I mentioned, I'm kind of looking at getting wide receivers early if that falls into place. Quarterbacks, I kind of usually wait. I'm not a second, third round guy to get Josh Allen or Hurts or Mahomes or any of those, because, again, looked at last year, not that big of a separation at that level. I mean, Allen was, first in total points, 76% consistent. That's not terrible, but that's still 76%. The highest was actually only 82. The sad part was when I kind of like 75% is kind of my threshold for quarterbacks. Like I really want them to be at least around there. And there was only 4 of them that were above 75. So Allen at 76, Cousins was 75, though he missed half the season. Kyler Murray was 75, but he missed half the season. And Jalen Hurts was 82. That's it. So, like I said, you got Lamar Jackson at 63. Prescott was 65. CJ Stroud is going way high, was only 60%. Now, he had a great rookie season. I get that, but he's still only 60% consistent.
Yeah.
And yet he's being drafted like as quarterback 5. And I'm like, Joe Burrow is going. I guess Joe Burrow. Yeah. Joe Burrow's going 6th or going as QB 6. Like, I'll take Joe Burrow every day of the week. Stroud could have another nice season. I just can't see him matching that. I mean, he might. But so, like I said, I kind of stay looking at the consistency numbers, and they just kind of play out where it's kind of like wide receivers, running backs, maybe a quarterback, maybe a tight end, depending who's there. And then, but my draft strategy always is and always will be, I want to draft my starting lineup in the first 8 rounds. At the end of the 8th round, I need to have my at least one tight end, one quarterback, running backs, and wide receivers filled. Now, if it's a big flex, then I'll, but I want to have that model of consistency in front of me. So now I can take chances on a guy later. Maybe it's a rookie. Maybe it's a second-year guy. Maybe, people that seem to, have a good value that I can draft. And that's, doesn't always win, but I just feel better about, I always say you can't win a championship if you don't make the playoffs. And so a lot of people always are like, oh, I want to make sure I draft this guy because he's got a great matchups in weeks 14, 15, 16, and 17. That's great. But if you're 5 and 7, then it's not going to help you.
Yeah. I often think I just try and draft to win the first 4 weeks. I've heard
that. I've heard 6 weeks too. It's like if you're at 6-0, you have a really good chance of making the playoffs, right?
I won a home league that I think about a lot, which was with when I looked at it at the end of the season, there was one player that I drafted on the team, and the rest of it was waiver pickups and trades, but mostly waiver pickups. And it was such whoever I can't remember who the backup running back to Austin Eckler was that season. I know Antonio Brown was like the wide receiver 1 there when he was in Tampa, that's the point, that it's so you can set yourself up as much as you want from the draft, but it does change so much across the course of the season.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
But yeah, so talking of draft strategy, that brings me on to my question, Bob. So everyone's doing charity leagues and everything like this, and I don't know if you're like us, Bob. We all play in so many different charity leagues for so many great causes, and obviously all these different charity leagues have different scoring setups and everything like that. Is there a way that you can use your book so you can sort of work out draft strategies and how you take that and implement that into a charity thing, into a draft with a charity tournament? And do you look for more risky players when it comes to a charity tournament because you kind of want a bit more upside and you want to do something that's a bit different? Because something like the Scott Fish Bowl has got 4,000 people in it, and if you're if the person that won takes Josh Allen on every league, you kind of want to be a little bit different somewhere. So are there, can you use your book to sort of go, right, do you know what? I'm going to reach for the upside with this player because I think he could be a little bit better than what he is and stuff. Is there ways that you can do that?
I mean, the book's helpful, but the website is more helpful because you can go into the tool called their consistency report on Big Guy Fantasy Sports and put in the scoring method. Now, that only does scoring method for normal player lineup stuff. So these fantasy cares eliminators where punters now are scoring more points than running backs, I don't have that in there. Sorry, folks. I don't have anything for coaches. I don't have anything for kickers. So, it depends on the charity thing. Scott Fish Bowl has the first down stuff in it. I don't have first down. So I'm kind of limited there. But if it does have unique scorings like touchdowns over so much distance or bonuses for 300 yards passing, you can put that into the report on the website. It does have a lot of that stuff. But yeah, these wild ones where we're including punters and coaches and look at what they did last year and kind of figure it out. That's what I did, because I was like looking at the FC eliminators, and I was in my league, and I'm looking at this going, there's punters that are scoring more than most of the wide receivers. I forget. It was like, I think it was a punter from Tennessee last year. It was like 23rd in scoring. And I'm like, what? How is this possible? But that's what their system is. So I think I drafted like 4 punters in this year's league. So it should be interesting. But those are fun. I mean, again, it's for charity, right? I always just look at it that I'm just donating to charity. If I win anything, good for me. But I usually just going in for the donation part, whether it's Scott Fishbowl or I know Murph does his thing. Always love being in that one, and there's been many, many more. So that's what my wife's always like. How many leagues are you in this year? I'm like 30. She's like, what? I go, yeah, but half of them are for charity.
Yeah, I'm sort of the same. I'm a bit of a degenerate when it comes to the charity.
Yeah, right. I mean, I like to give money to others.
I think I've got about 25 leagues, and I'd say about 6 or 7 of them are all charity leagues. And
right, exactly.
And then I see one pop up on X, and it's this is my charity, and I'm like, yeah, I'll come and join you and everything like this. But it's I find it quite difficult to keep track of, to be fair, because they all try and be different with their scoring systems, and it just fries your brain sometimes, and you just
that's why I like them to be like best ball type, right? Just draft like the eliminators. Just draft, and whatever happens.
I do prefer the charities to be best ball, because it is just a case of just draft them all.
Yeah, just draft and see what happens.
And the fate's with the gods. Then it's
right.
If I win it, I win it. If I don't, I don't. It's the taking part that counts, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, they're all great fun, aren't they? Those. Bob, you've mentioned a few players already where potentially to some people they have been surprisingly consistent, so like the Joe Mixons, the Evan Ingrams. But when you kind of look through last season for the book, Bob, were there some players that you were actually quite surprised at how consistent they were, versus kind of what you thought during the season? And based on that, what are your thoughts for these kind of players in 2024?
The one that surprised me the most, and probably everybody, and interestingly enough, I was in the Kings Classic auction draft, and I had bought AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase as my wide receivers, and I didn't spend a ton. I mean, like $50 each for Chase and Jefferson, and I think $37 for Brown. But of course, spent a lot of money. Then got, I think, Justin Herbert as my quarterback, and I got Dallas Goedert as my tight end. So I had very little at running back, and so I bought Raheem Mostert for $4, and I was 9-0 in that league until Burrow went down, which Chase got hurt or pretty much didn't score much. Jefferson goes out for 6 weeks. AJ Brown was playing well. Goddard got hurt. Herbert got hurt. Anyway, long story short, I made the playoffs, made it to the finals, and lost to Mauricio. But Raheem Mostert pretty much carried my team for many weeks. And at one point, he was second in total points. I think he ended the year still in pretty good shape, if I remember right. Let's see if I can find him. Yeah, he was 5th in total points. And he was 3rd in consistency at 87%. But he got hurt some games too. He missed 3 games. So, but he was definitely, my surprise favorite. Now, do I expect Raheem Mostert to do that again this year? Probably not. But if he stays healthy, he's still definitely part of that backfield. We've got Devin Achin, who should, probably see more carries this year, but he couldn't stay healthy. So, it's one of those crapshoots. Like, I might buy Mostert again for $4. You never know. But yeah, so he's definitely one from last year. I think we were surprised by, Rashad White ended up 4th in total points. And again, was real consistent. I mean, I think that's why he was a surprise to a lot of people at the end of the year and go, oh, he was 4th in total points, but he was 76% consistent, which put him 7th in running backs last year. So he was quite a surprise. You know, James Cook came on second half of the year after Joe Brady took over as OC. So, you know, those kind of running backs catch you off guard. You know, you hope you get them. I think there was definitely some, you know, also in the wide receiver world, if I remember. I'm going to scroll down to that. You know, that surprised quite a few. Of course, Puka Nacua was probably the big one that nobody expected. You know, but Garrett Wilson was surprisingly 81% or 71% consistent, even though he had garbage wide receiver. You know, he was definitely a surprise. Pittman for the 3rd year in a row has been above 75% consistent. Again, nobody expected that when, you know, Anthony Richardson went down and our Uncle Rico took over at the quarterback. So, yeah, there's definitely some surprises out there. I'm trying to see if there's anybody else that jumps out at me. Everybody else is kind of up there. Nico Collins was probably a surprise to most. I don't think anybody thought that he was going to come up there and be that strong. So, yeah, I mean, and like I said, there was quite a few tight ends that really stepped up. I mean, Evan Ingram being right up there at the top with the rest of them was a surprise, and I think he'll continue that. I mean, Ridley's gone, Calvin Ridley left, so they're back to Christian Kirk as the number 1. So I feel like, yeah, I mean, Evan still should see a lot of passes this year. So that's a few of them, yeah.
I thought, you know, we're talking about Rashad White. And I'm interested in your thoughts on him this year, Bob, because again, I definitely think he's a guy that everyone will be quite surprised at how consistent he was, because I think people kind of thought he was fine, but you know, didn't really think much else of him. Are you into him this year, Bob? Or, you know, the fact that they've brought in a rookie, do you think maybe there's, you know, they're going to kind of cause issues for him?
Yeah, I mean, they obviously always want to have somebody fresh behind a person. It's more of just one making sure that that he does get hurt, that they've got somebody. But, you know, you look at that team, that's one of those teams that like nothing changed, right? We still got Baker Mayfield. We still have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, you know, now and of course we got Rashad White in the backfield. So I really don't see much changing in this offense. So I think, yeah, I mean, he's running back 11 going in the 3rd round. I'd be, again, if I get top two quarterback or top 2 wide receivers and he's sitting there in round 2 or 3 or 3 or 4, I'd be more than happy to draft him at that level. I think he'll maintain that consistency. And again, if you can get close to 75%, even as a RB2 or RB1, you know, later rounds kind of thing like that, yeah, I'm perfectly fine with Rashad White. I definitely would pick him up again this year. I had him in a lot of leagues last year because I could draft him later. You know, he wasn't really a high pick. I thought he would be. I thought he would have a higher ADP last year when we knew that, who was there? Leonard Fournette left, but there wasn't a lot of love for him. And so I was drafting him like in round 5 in quite a few leagues, you know, again, when that Joe Mixon and, you know, Alvin Kamara's and those kind of people. So, yeah, I, you know, right now it looks like it may not be, it's a little bit higher, but I feel like I've done a couple, at least best ball drafts, and it wasn't going that high. So I'm pulling mine from the NFFC, you know, league. So maybe it's a little different.
I'm really interested. I'd like to ask you about kind of what led you to the metric in particular. So obviously the guide's something you've been publishing for a number of years now and has been absolutely thriving. And I'm definitely really interested because so we've just finished our position by position breakdown going through the top 12 and then top 24 from last season. And it's definitely really interesting. The players that you look at and you go, well, they finished RB5. It didn't feel like that. Like, yeah. I remember when we looked at Travis Etienne and we were like, oh, he was RB oh, the RB2 or RB3. Like that didn't feel like that was the case. And I also, in my own website, have been looking at sort of how players scored their points, and it really like adds to that feeling as well of, okay, well, an inconsistent player may have won you weeks, but also will have lost you some. But as we look back at the scoring, we remember when they had, the multiple touchdown game, not the multiple weeks that they busted. So what actually led you to consistency as a metric originally? And how would you say your thoughts around it have changed over the years that you've been producing the guide?
So I've been playing fantasy football since 1985. In 2002, in that league was always, because we didn't have internet. We did it by hand, so we did touchdown only scoring. And so that same league, which now will be entering its 40th season. But in 2002, I had the third highest scoring team. My team went 7-7. And I was very upset because I didn't make the playoffs, because I had the league MVP, Sean Alexander. And he rushed for 15 touchdowns that year. And yet somehow my team just didn't do it. And so that's when so I'm an accountant during the day. That's my real job. So, of course, I'm a numbers guy. So I had to look at the numbers. And so I looked, and here in one game on a Monday night, Alexander scored 5 touchdowns in one game. He scored 3 touchdowns in another game, 2 touchdowns in another game. So out of the 14 regular season games, he scored 2/3 of his touchdowns, 3 of them. And the other 11 games, he scored the other 5 over that stretch. So obviously that's why I went 500. And so I went and just for fun redid my scoring for every game with him scoring 1 or 2 touchdowns so that he got, spread that 15 out during that time frame. And I figured I calculated that I would have won 2 more games, made the playoffs, and won the championship. But I didn't. But at that point, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If this applies here, then why wouldn't this apply to any scoring method? I just have to figure out how I'm going to do that. And so that's when I came up with the whole kind of consistency model, the clutch factor, which is the point where it is kind of determining that they would qualify in the top 12 for each week, top 24 running backs, top 36 receivers, and top 12 tight ends. And that's where the clutch factor comes into calculation. Now, of course, now it's done automatically on my website. But, like you said, and each year it changes. So like last year was the lowest ever clutch factor for quarterbacks. It was 18.5, 18.6. 3-4 years ago, it was close to 20. And yet still you'd see what I say. There's only 5 quarterbacks that were 75% consistent with the lowest clutch factor that we've had in years. I mean, and I've been doing this for, like I said, since 2002. So, 15, 20 years, this is one of the lowest quarterback clutch factors I've ever seen. And yet they still were inconsistent. A lot of quarterbacks were inconsistent. So, running backs is around 10.5 to 11. Wide receivers are about the same. So the PPR format just kind of makes them equals. And then tight ends, I think about 8.5-ish, 8 to 8.5. So that's the clutch factor that they have to get over to kind of qualify for that top 12. Now, some weeks there's 14 quarterbacks or tight ends. Some weeks there's 10. But over average, it's usually around the 12, 24, 36 range for those positions. So that's kind of how it all came together. But 2002 is when it all came to reality, and that's what I've been doing. Now, the book I just started writing about 8, 9, 10 years ago. And it was just because I was writing an article every year for a couple of magazines that were on, bookstore magazines. And I was trying to ask them about doing player profiles for consistency to put in their player profiles. And they're like, we don't have enough room, but thank you. Great idea. By the way, did you know you could self-publish on Amazon? And I'm like, I did not know that. So somebody showed me how to do it. And as they say, the rest is history. And, so yeah, it's been a fun ride, and I appreciate everybody's love and support of it, and glad that they love it. I always say, it's not about the money. It's those emails I get to say, hey, thank you. You know, I never had won a championship or even made the playoffs, but I bought your book and, you know, and it made a difference. And I'm like, yeah, that's what it's all about.
So it's the best feeling you can possibly get.
It is.
Isn't it?
It is so much.
I had last year's book, Bob, and I will be getting this year's book again.
Okay.
But I want to ask you. So we speak a lot about the top players in drafts and everything like this, but I want to pick your brain about the later people, and I want to know who your targets are later on. Are there people that you can see the consistency behind them and go, actually, the value of this player is really good, and I can sneak them in I'm talking now the last sort of 5 rounds of a draft and go, do you know what? You know, you're probably not going to find somebody with a consistency level of over about 70%, but you can go, do you know what? This guy, he's really consistent. He's quite good with scoring, and he's a late round flyer. I want to know who your late round guys are that you quite like in drafts.
So, yeah, there's usually quite a few. So in the book, I have what I call the consistent undervalued players, and usually the last one in the list. So that's what I went to first so I can remember. So one of them right now is Jonnu Smith. You're like, wait, what? Jonnu Smith, didn't he die? No, he's still alive. He played last year, and he was the thorn in all Kyle Pitts owners' sides because Arthur Smith was getting him the ball more than he was Kyle Pitts. But he ended up last year 16th in total points, 21st in consistency. Guess what? He's not in Atlanta anymore. He is now the starting tight end for the Dolphins. They actually grabbed him in free agency. And I think I don't remember if it's a coaching thing, like whoever was a coach in Atlanta or for New England maybe was, like a big proponent. And so, Mike Gesicki left. And so they brought Jonnu Smith to be the main starter in Miami. And you've got Tyreek and Waddle and all these guys stretching the field. I could see, especially like if you have a 2 tight end league or a tight end premium league or a best ball, like I think he'd be a great best ball pick because he's going in like round, I think it's like tight end 27. I forget what his actual ADP is, but it's something ridiculously bad. Like in the 200s or something. Yeah, 228. So pretty much undrafted, but in a best ball league or a late, if you got depth, you got a big bench, definitely don't forget about him. He's definitely one of those guys that could be sitting there real late and nobody's picking up, but he's the starter for the Dolphins. So people probably don't remember that. It's because they missed that. Then they're like, oh, Jonnu Smith, he's dead, right? No, he's not dead. So he's one. Running or wide receiver wise, everybody forgets about Jacoby Myers last year, unless you had him. Did you know he was 24th in total points last year? Jacoby Meyer for the Raiders. He was, and he was 29th in consistency with, Devontae Adams on the team, garbage for quarterbacks. And they still pretty much have that, even though Minshew's there. That might help a little bit. But he's wide receiver 46. Again, I think going in round, God knows, 150, 180. So again, somebody is your wide receiver 5 or 6 in a deep league or a heavy flex league. Should be great value that late. So definitely take a look at him. Running backs, I don't have anybody too late, but a lot of people are forgetting about Zach Moss going to Cincinnati to replace Joe Mixon. Again, last year when he filled in for Jonathan Taylor for the Colts, he was crushing it during that time frame. His only competition is Chase Brown, who's been there for 3 or 4 years and hasn't taken the starting role. Obviously didn't feel comfortable about giving him the starting role. His ADP is RB33 in round 9. So again, not a bad pick for late. Could be your running back 3 or 4 as a starter for the Bengals. Seems like a really good deal at that spot. So there's a few of them. The other one, it would be Brian Robinson too. His ADP is RB32. So he's right in ahead of Zach Moss, but he was 22nd in total points and 23rd in consistency. And not a lot of people remember that. So that's what the kind of stuff that we like to pinpoint. I think also, even though it's not a late round pick, make sure you grab Alvin Kamara, because remember, he was 12th in total points, 5th in consistency, and they actually are putting in a new zone scheme system for him. And they think the other smarter people than me, like Jeff Manns and Howard Bender, some of these guys, they keep reminding, if you listen to Sirius XM, they keep reminding everybody that Kamara did most of that because of, check downs from Derek Carr, who's still there. But if he can rush for 1,000 yards, which he didn't get to last year because they didn't run the ball as much, he could have a really big season too. So definitely some good values out there.
Yeah, and music to my ears with Brian Robinson, because I've been banging the trumpet about Brian Robinson for years. Years and years and years. It feels like so. That's music to my ears.
Good.
So, Bob, I'd like to move on to some more specific players, if that's okay.
Sure.
The first guy that I was interested in speaking to you about was Calvin Ridley. To me, it just seemed from, having to deal with him on my teams in the season, he felt really inconsistent last year. Is that something that played out in the numbers when you did the consistency metric on him? Obviously now he's moved on to a new situation. He's on the Titans. Do you think that potentially could change this year and he could become more consistent again? Or do you have reservations about him generally at this point?
So, Hannah, just like you, I was very high on Calvin Ridley last year, and I had him on a lot of my teams. And he started off with a bang, right? Didn't he have like 30 points the first week? I was like, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
And he had some big games, so that's why he ended up 19th in total points. You're like, okay, so wide receiver too, right? You're like, eh. But his consistency was 47%, which was 46th amongst wide receivers. So you were correct. He was not very consistent. I don't see how he could improve on that, because he was the number one guy in Jacksonville. Now he's the number 2 behind D-Hop. You've also got Treylon Burks. You've got Tony Pollard out of the backfield. You got Tajay Spears out of the backfield. I mean, his ADP is wide receiver 30, so it seems respectable. But then when you see the 46th in consistency last year, kind of like, I don't even know if 30th I would do it. So I'm out on him this year. I mean, maybe he falls farther and I can get him as a wide receiver 4 or 5, but probably not because of the name. And I certainly, if you've done drafts with people, you'll see people just, oh, it's D-Hop, or oh, it's Calvin Ridley. Oh, yeah. Look at me. I got Calvin Ridley in round 8, and you're like, yeah, but he still sucks. So yeah, I'm not in on him this year. I wouldn't recommend him. I know they wanted to throw the ball a little bit more, obviously, without Derrick Henry, but I just feel like there's just so many mouths to feed that I don't see how he can gain much consistency in that system. But
just before we move on to the next player, sorry, I just want to what about, we mentioned D-Hop as now his kind of teammate. D-Hop felt very kind of meh last year. I think, I took him in not many, but in a couple of leagues, and I was a bit like, I don't think he's really added much. But again, what was his consistency like? And are you more into D-Hop than Calvin, or are you out on both of them?
So D-Hop was a little bit better than Ridley. He was 59%, but that's still 35th amongst receivers. Now, his ADP this year, so right now, is at wide receiver 41. So they actually have Ridley, Ridley's ADP is higher than his. But again, I just don't feel like I'm just not excited about the Titans offense at this point. Their offensive line is one of the worst. I don't know if it even got any better. Maybe they drafted some players, but I think they were 32nd last year or 31st. That's why a lot of people are all high on Derrick Henry going to Baltimore, who has a better offensive line. But yeah, I just feel like, the only way I can, these guys can get a ton of points is if, they just losing a lot of games by a lot of points, and, they got a lot of garbage time. But I don't know. they're also playing in a weak division with the Jags, the Colts, who is it? The Jags, Colts. Who's the other one? Oh, the Texans. So they might get in some shootouts with the Texans, maybe. But Will Levis didn't show me enough. I mean, he had that one great game when he came in the first, when he threw 4 touchdowns. But I think it just caught everybody by surprise because he never did it again. It wasn't even close again. So I'm not real sold on that offense, that team. There's a lot of big names there with Ridley, D-Hop, Pollard, Tajay Spears, Chiggy at tight end. A lot of names in fantasy that people were like, oh yeah. But I'm just not feeling that offense at all this year, especially since the offensive line didn't improve much. I feel like it's just a big mess. So yeah, I'm kind of staying away from them.
Yeah, they really felt to me like a tough click, really.
Yeah.
But, and I think maybe people, like you say, particularly D-Hop and Ridley, people are like, oh, I recognise that name. Oh, look how kind of, late they're going. This is totally worth it because I know that they have been good wide receivers in the past.
Well, and D-Hop was 22nd, right, in total points. So they're like, oh, well, he's a wide receiver too. Yeah, he was a wide receiver. He wasn't even, he's barely a wide receiver 3 in consistency. We already looked at Ridley, who was 46. So, those two shouldn't be on your starting lineup. Maybe he's a flex, obviously, and it could be good best balls. Like there could be weeks where they might put up some big numbers because, their defense doesn't hold up. Like I said, against the Texans, I could see that, but Colts and Jags, maybe. I don't know. It's, I feel like there's just other people in those ADP areas that I was like, I'd be like more of, Deontay Johnson maybe, or I'm trying to think all the guys that are in that spot that I have. So around Ridley, you got guys like Chris Godwin, T. Higgins, Marquise Brown, George Pickens. I feel like I'd rather have one of those than the other ones. I mean, where do I have D-Hop?
Not even on the page, Bob. Not even on the page.
Yeah, that's right.
You must be really far down.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I just don't have a lot of love for the Tennessee offense at this point.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I was looking into booms and busts from last year in terms of the top 24 wide receivers, and 8 of the top 24 had more games in PPR with less than 10 fantasy points than they did over 20, and 2 of those 8 were Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. So I'm not surprised at all to see them finish quite poorly in inconsistency as well. The player that I wanted to ask about is someone that you've touched upon already, and that's Devon Achane. So he had a real breakout season, but also he scored 34.6% of his fantasy points from touchdowns in 2023, and obviously that backfield is a little more clogged now, and it seems they're just going for multiple of the same thing. They're just interested in speed. So obviously you mentioned him a little bit already, but how does he fit into your rankings for 2024? And who would you really be looking to go for in that Dolphins backfield?
Yeah, so in the book I said that he scored 175 out of his 192 points in the 7 clutch games that he earned, which means basically just he, when he was good, he was amazing. When he was bad, he was, he was 64% consistent because he played 11 games, but amazingly enough, he was 24th in total points in just 11 games, ranked 15th in consistency. What I keep hearing and I keep reading is that he's going to be the man, and I think he could have been the man last year if he had stayed healthy. But Mostert was good enough and certainly played very well. And then Mostert had to fill in a lot of games because he missed 6 of them or 7 of them. Yeah, I have him as like my my running back 10 or 11. But I'm not gonna lie, if I'm at a point in my draft and he's sitting there, and I'm going to look for every other option than him to draft, because guys like that just scare me where they can't stay healthy. It's like, that's great that you can run like a cheetah, but if you take one hit and you're done for 3 or 4 games, it's, consistency also means you need to be consistently on the field.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And he's going at the end of round 1 or early round 2. So, I mean, you really have to feel very confident that he's going to play at least 15, 16 games. If he does, you probably got to steal, but is it a steal if you got to pick him in round 1 or 2? Then he's just matching what he should be doing. And you can draft Mostert in round, way down, round 7, 6. Yeah. So, I don't think Mostert's going to put up the numbers he did last year, but if he can, be that, if he can get 10, 15 carries and still get 12, 15 points, guess what? That's a clutch game. So at a much, at 6 rounds later, Mostert may be a better pick, or draft them both. I mean, that's the ultimate. If you can pull that off, if you take A-Chain in round 2 and take Mostert in round 6, you're covered. You might even start both of them if you got a flex spot. But then at least you're covered. If one of them goes down, you've now got that person to be the main back. So there's that option too, but still gutsy.
Yeah. So I want to speak to you about one of my players, Bob. But I think there's so many players we could sit here and just pick your brain about.
That's fine.
There's literally I think we could sit here for another 2-3 hours just chatting about different players and stuff.
I may have to go to the bathroom, but yeah.
But but the guy I want to talk about is somebody that I kind of feel every year he's very consistent. He sort of always sees a lot of targets, always sees a lot of everything, and somehow I feel like his value just drops every year, and I'm just confused by it. It's Deontay Johnson that was at the Steelers, now at the Panthers. And I was looking at some of his stats, and like last year was his lowest one, but he's had something like 600 and something targets over 4 years, and it's just like he's an absolutely incredible amount of targets and everything like this. So I just want to ask you, how consistent is he? Are we just seeing a lot of ball being thrown to him, or is it him? Is it what? Is he actually a consistent player, or have I got the blinkers on and I'm just thinking, he sees loads of targets, he must be great,
Well, he was a consistent player until they drafted Kenny Pickett. Then it all went. But 2021, he was 94% consistent, which ranked him 5th. But then 22 came, he dropped down to 53%, ranked 39th. Last year, 62%, ranked 31st. He played he missed 4 or 5 games last year, so that didn't help. Yeah. And then with George Pickens around, which I assume is your brother because you have the same last name.
Yeah, definitely.
But he got a little cocky in the offseason and said, "I want out of here. I want traded." So they did, but he got traded to the Carolina Panthers. The good thing is, I think that's a better spot for him because now he's the true number 1. Maybe not true number 1. I mean, so Adam Thielen got all the balls last year because that was the only person Bryce Young could trust, which made sense. But Deontay Johnson's obviously a lot younger than Adam Thielen. So I feel like if he can just take Adam Thielen's spot, he's destined to be way above his value. Right now he's going at wide receiver 40. And I think I have him ranked a little higher. And I think just mostly because I'm just not 100% sure, but I'm sure that as time goes, I'll probably move him up, and you definitely should be in the top 36. But I really think that, if he can just match Adam Thielen's numbers and consistency, because Thielen last year was pretty consistent in that offense because of the fact that Bryce Young threw to him all the time. Trying to see if I can find what Thielen was. I don't have all these on memorized, so anyway.
You should.
I should, right? Yeah. Where the heck is Thielen? I know he was in there.
He's
Oh,
that old. He's been removed.
Yeah, so Thielen was 65% consistent, but he was 17th in total, and he was 17th in total points. So, that's pretty impressive for a guy that was like 31, 32 years old. So my thought is if Deontay Johnson comes in and just matches that, you've got a guy who's top 24. And he's going at wide receiver 40. So I like Deontay Johnson a lot, and for that reason. So I think he's now going to a good spot. If he stays healthy and, doesn't have an attitude problem, should be fine. The Panthers improved their offensive line. They added him. They added, I thought they added somebody else too. I forget who it was, but yeah, they should be in much better shape this year. So I like Deontay going into there. And I've always been a Deontay fan. I'm like you. I always felt like he got targeted quite a bit. He was definitely always a good value. It dropped off drastically with Pickett came into town, which is why after Pickett's not there anymore. So yeah, I'm definitely very high on him going into this year as a good undervalued, wide receiver 3 or 4.
Do you have any worries about Bryce Young, Bob, or do you feel confident that he's going to improve a bit this year?
I think he has to improve. Can't go down. Well, he might, but no, I think, you look at the two, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. CJ Stroud went to a team that was loaded and Young did not, and how many times do we see quarterbacks, especially drafted 1, 2, or 3 in the NFL draft, and they go to a very bad team that and then people are like, oh, this guy sucks. He's going, and then you see somebody go to a team that's loaded. Like, look at Caleb Williams this year. Like, if this guy doesn't succeed with that team around him, there's a problem. And not everybody gets to walk onto a team like that or get drafted by a team like that. I remember when Ben Roethlisberger was drafted, then he won a Super Bowl, and they're like, oh, he's amazing. He's a god. I'm like, do you see the team he came on to? It's like, it really was nothing to fix other than quarterback. But, not everybody has that privilege, and Bryce Young was one of them. The Panthers are not a good organization. They haven't been doing good at drafting or free agency or anything. I don't know if they're just gotten cheap or what it's been, but they just have not been making good personnel decisions over the last few years. And so, hopefully they made some better ones now this offseason. I think he'll be better. I'm not saying he's worthy of being drafted on your fantasy team yet, but I think he'll definitely be, have more points, more consistency this year than he did last year. But again, not maybe a 2 quarterback league, but maybe he's your 3rd one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, hopefully he can't be any worse than last year. New head coach, and he's been known to really do well with quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith. So hopefully he can get something out of Bryce and put, a friendly scheme around him so that he can succeed, which would be really nice for all our Deontay Johnson's shares.
Yeah, I'd say that should really help Deontay Johnson even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, you have given us some awesome information here. I think we've all come away with some really fantastic kind of new pieces of knowledge and information that's really going to help us this year. Before we go, Bob, please remind everyone where we can find you, where we can get the book, and why we should come to the US to the FF Expo at some point over the next few years.
Oh, well, first, everybody should go that lives over there should go to your guys's UK FFC. Is it still called that? Make sure I got it right.
Yeah.
The UK FFC. That was a great time last year, folks. If you haven't went to it, please go. You're missing out if you don't. All of these great people were there, plus Murph and Dan Hughes and all the people. I had such a great time there last year. So much. Find me on Twitter at Bob_Lung. You can find the expo at the FF Expo. The expo is in Canton, Ohio, August 9th through the 11th. If you just feel like jumping on a plane and flying overseas, we'd love to have you. I think there's one coming over from the UK. I forget who it is. But he mentioned he was coming. But anyway, and then you can find the book, the 2024 Consistency Guide, Fantasy Football Consistency Guide on Amazon.uk, right over there. So check it out over there. Anywhere else, just whatever your respective dot is, whether it's .com in the US or .jp or .mex or whatever all the ones are from the various countries. Check them all out. And I think if you're a Prime member, you get them in 2 days. So that's pretty awesome. So once again, thank you folks for having me. Always a pleasure. Always great to talk with you, and love to hang out with again sometime.
Yeah, no, thank you, Bob. We have had a great time. I think it's certainly been my favourite show of the off season so far. We've learned so much from you, and we're all really, really appreciative that you've joined us. So for everyone, thank you so much for joining us this week. We will see you again next week. Unfortunately, we won't have Bob with us, but you'll have to put up with us three again. So until then, see you then.